The information provided is not a substitute for legal and other professional advice where the facts and circumstances warrant. People should always consult their own legal or other professional advisors and discuss the facts and circumstances that apply to their specific circumstances. The information shared on Ask the Landlord is for educational purposes only.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ask the Landlord with our favorite landlord, Albert Dweck. I'm Melissa. I'm one of Albert's producers and a former New York City, Pittsburgh, Lafayette, Louisiana, and Washington, D.C. renter. And together, we're going to ask this landlord some questions. If you have a question for Albert and you want to call us and get on the show, leave us a voicemail at the Ask the Landlord hotline. That number is 646-580-3015. How are you today, Albert?
I'm good, Melissa. How are you today?
I'm good. And I think you are the perfect person to ask this specific question because how many years have you been in the rental market?
Oh, boy. Meaning the landlord officially?
Being a landlord, estimate.
More than 20 years.
Okay. More than 20 years. Perfect.
23 years. Right.
Okay. More than 20 years, right? 20 years
Right.
of experience. You've seen everything. You've seen the prices drop. You've seen the prices skyrocket. You've seen neighborhoods change. So in your opinion, how has the rental market evolved in recent years and what trends do you foresee in the future?
I've seen in recent years, there's been certainly a constraint on supply. I don't think supply has caught up with demand as much as it needs to be. And that's, a lot of factors there. So that puts a real constraint on the existing housing. Like there's a lot of demand for existing housing. Also, when you just look at world population, that continues to increase overall. So, we're not making any more land, and yet the population of the world continues to grow. So, fundamentally, the demographics, have it so that, more people and not enough housing, let's say. And then you're talking about affordability. And then when there's scarcity of housing, affordable housing, there's just more people looking for less housing. And then if you don't build enough housing, you don't have enough housing, right? So, and then what happens is there's also a political backdrop to that where, we're electing in the United States, we're electing politicians for relatively short terms, which is like 4-year terms. And you're telling them, oh no, I want you to have a long view on this market. Like you're telling a politician, oh, don't think about the short term, think about the long term. And the politician's not, it's whether or not they understand that issue, it's fine. They're, and the cycle that we have them in is like, oh, they work to get elected, they get elected, they work, and then they have to get reelected. So they're like half the time that they're in office, they're thinking about getting reelected, right? So then it's not really, they're not thinking about the long term, what they have to do long term to fix things, right? They're only thinking about how I got here and what's going to keep me here, as opposed to long term thinking. So what's happened more in the last 10 years in the United States is, policies, political policies have gotten more progressive, where politicians say, you know what, I want people to have affordable housing. Okay, so that makes sense. So, we should enact rent controls, more, try to stabilize pricing for rentals. And you're like, okay. And then they say, well, no one says, well, let's build more housing. No, let's control the pricing. So that's messed up. The way to, it's, and this is like a basic economics thing. It's like supply and demand. You want there to be lower prices, make more supply. Don't constrain supply. So that's what the politicians in the short term are doing. They're saying, we want to keep people happy. We want to keep rents down, which is for the moment okay, but for the long term, it doesn't create more supply. It just constrains existing supply more. So people aren't incentivized to. So people aren't incentivized to move because they their rent is being controlled where they are. Right. For example, in California, in many places, your your rents are stabilized where they are. Right, when you're living there, but when you move out, it goes to free market. Right. So you're like, oh, so then I'm not going to move because I have a good situation. So then that uh, disincentivizes you to be upwardly mobile, right? Okay, then there's a lot of laws that are imposed about building new housing and restrictions, and then you tell people if you're going to build new housing, it has to be affordable. So then, if you're a developer and you can't get the full value out of your invested dollars, why would you build something? Oh, so the government tells you, you have to keep it affordable. You're like, no problem. But how do I produce a return then if I'm going to do that? So, and then the process of doing this becomes very bureaucratic. So, what we've seen is, I think, a movement, in economics, politics, where things have moved too far to the left um, to um, take care of the customer, which is fine, and they shouldn't be moving too far to the right to take care of the only the business person, right? So there needs to be a middle ground, and I think we've lost that in recent years, and that's hurt. While it looks like it helps the renter in the short term, it does, but it doesn't in the long term. It just doesn't create enough housing, and ultimately, the people who get hurt the most are regular people who just need to rent something. Does all that make sense?
It does kind of. So, how do landlords get around building new units or buildings that aren't deemed for affordable housing? Because I'm picturing like Billionaires Row in Manhattan, like those. How do the landlords or the builders and developers get around that?
There's no getting around it. In New York City, um, as an example, it's just really difficult because the land is expensive. So your starting point is, having expensive land, and then you have to build whatever it costs to build, right? And then you end up with how do you make money if the land's expensive and it's expensive to build? So the government typically says to builders or developers, look, if you're going to build something new, we want you to include a certain percentage of affordable housing. And for that, we'll give you some incentives like tax breaks and things like that. The problem is that's also become a political football where that there was a big incentive for builders to build affordable housing, and now that's expired for a significant amount of time. So right now there is no incentive. Imagine so there's no incentive to build affordable housing now for a significant amount of time in New York, and that
That
is a real problem.
Right, that creates definitely a huge problem for hundreds of thousands, millions of people.
Right. So then the only thing that makes sense to build is something that's very expensive.
And that's what it's coming to, right? So that's the
Right.
trends you foresee.
Yeah. Well, that's what's going on
Right.
now.
Interesting. That's a good point.
What we need is, and then the other thing there's a big thing that's going to happen is that there's like, I think 78 million baby boomers, and they're aging. And I think 10,000 of them are, retiring a day.
Hmm.
And yeah, and there was the biggest generation of people in the United States after the war, World War II. So they are now, we're living in houses mostly, right? And then their children, let's say, moved out, right? And then they have this house that they have,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now they're the house, let's say, was like had stairs or it's too big, and really it's their whole equity in the house is like what they have.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to sell the house and then, move into some place where they need to be taken care of because they're getting older.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big business of senior housing where, seniors need more care and less space, right? And
Mm-hmm.
easier, that's going to work with their bodies biologically, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that, that's expensive to have, right? And I'm thinking, what if someone can't afford that? What if someone doesn't have that? What if someone, how is everyone going to afford, I don't know, thousands of dollars a month in, assisted living, whatever you want to call that, right?
Right, when they've lived in
So,
probably a paid off house for numerous years.
so
Right.
if the theory is that if they lived in a paid off house, that they could sell the
Right.
house
That's
and
true.
then take that money and then use that. But what if they didn't?
Right.
What if they were renters their whole
Oh,
lives?
very true.
And
Absolutely.
they're also, and now what are they going to do?
So what are they going to do?
I don't know.
I don't know.
You know,
They live
I
with
don't
their
know.
kids and then the cycle continues.
It's possible,
Right?
it's possible. So there's one of the things I was thinking about is, how you have like, I don't know, this is an idea, but you have young people living together to afford the rent, let's say after college, right? So people need to get together to afford the rent until they could make enough money and then go out on their own, right? Like
Mhm.
your first apartment you're sharing with somebody
Of
in New
course.
York, at least.
Of course.
What about the reverse of that? What about saying that now, what about older people living together to afford? Like if you have houses
I
where,
love it.
you have like, let's say you have like a caretaker or a person that's there, maybe it's cheaper, where you have like a 4-bedroom and people are sharing it, older people.
Oh my god.
An idea,
Does this exist? Do they do this now? I
Uh,
don't know.
yeah. I'm, I mean, I've heard it,
I think it's a great
but it's
idea.
not.
Let's start this, Albert. I
So
mean, that's a great
that's where I could
idea.
see. So we need a
And
solution
you make it like
to that.
college life again.
The other trend
That's a good one.
that's related to that is that, if you think about how people used to live in the early 1900s, in the early 20th century, they only lived until 60 something. Now they're living till 90. So they have to figure out what to do from 60 to 90.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole new thing too.
You mean to
That's related to this.
keep the older people
Go ahead.
entertained? Like mentally what they have to do or physically, or are you talking social
No, sorry.
security? Are you,
No. If from a big picture demographic issue,
right.
right? Not an issue, but whatever, something we have to deal with is that Social Security was created and the age was like 62, right? Initially,
Right.
because most of the people didn't live past 62.
Right.
But now you have people that are going to live to 90. Most people are the life expectancy increased significantly,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now you're saying that creates a whole new thing. Like, those people now have to be housed for 30 years.
Yeah.
Is anyone thinking about that?
I don't know. I think the kids are. I think about that, but
Right.
yeah.
So that something new that has to happen is people have to think about now the entire older population, where are they going to be housed? Because they're going to live longer.
Right.
That I don't think we're addressing that.
That's really interesting
Really.
because most of our conversations, I'm picturing like new people moving to New York or younger people moving into these apartments. But now it's kind of the fourth quarter of life where they need housing too, and help and assistance. And when you picture these nursing homes, I've seen it with my husband's grandma, like it was awful. They have really bad reputations. They're not, maybe
Oh,
this is a Pennsylvania thing.
I've seen other ones where
And
like
then there's
friends
really
and
good
family,
ones. There's two, but
really really nice
of
ones,
course,
right?
yeah. Like my dad's first cousin has been on a wait list to get into this like really nice assisted living where he's like,
And it's a fortune, by the way.
yeah, he's been on, he's very, yeah. So, but there's such like a difference of availability and options, and maybe to find that middle ground, that co-living maybe for that generation. It's a great idea. I want to be involved.
Yeah, and you think about also now, like there are a lot of people that are older, and who's listening to them? How does it work from a political standpoint of, you know, do they vote for people that create these kind of situations for themselves? So those are things to think about from a long-term perspective, how the market politics gets affected. Ultimately, I agree. I think coming back to it, it's coming back to the thing that's really going to make it better for pricing and affordability is creating supply.
Mm-hmm.
Period.
Right. So that's
Supply.
we got to figure how to do that, and then we're all good. So, all right. Thank you so much for your input on the trends and what you foresee as problems that a lot of people probably aren't thinking about. I know I was not thinking about. Now I will be. So thank you. And this was a great one. So thanks, Albert.
Thank you.
For more episodes, please subscribe to Ask the Landlord on your favorite podcast platform. We'd appreciate it if you left a review on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to watch the show, check out our Ask the Landlord YouTube channel. If you have a question for Albert, feel free to contact him on Instagram at Ask the Landlord and check out his TikTok at Ask the Landlord. Bridging the gap between landlords and tenants, this has been Ask the Landlord. Thanks for listening.